You see it?
Yep. You ready?
Yep. You just tell me when to go.
Let's go. Yep. We ready?
Yep. Go ahead.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to what is an innovative program organized by the North American, Central American, and Caribbean Area Association, NACAC, as we are called, and it comprises, of course, our countries from the region. You ready? This is our second program. Okay, we started last Thursday with the Spanish-speaking program, and that will continue every Thursday going forward. And on Saturdays at this time, we will have the English-speaking component. Let's just say, first of all, on behalf of NACAC, of which I'm the Secretary General, that we are happy to have you. And it's important for us that we continue to develop our coaches and to continue the search for coaches in our area. We always anticipate that our athletes will continue to do us proud on the international scene and on the regional scene, and even before their own populations at home. And we are enthused to see a number of people in our survey indicating their eagerness to become coaches in track and field. Just by way of background, the business of coaching in track and field and in a structured way actually started not with the International Federation, but with NACAC. Victor Lopez got together a number of outstanding coaches like Gary Winkler, Dan Paff, Lawrence Seagrave some years ago, and it started a series of programs based largely in Puerto Rico. We used to have annual programs, and we developed a system up to 5 levels we were heading. And over a period of time, we had trained hundreds of coaches within the NACAC area, Spanish as well as English speaking and some French speaking individuals. And then the International Amateur Athletics Federation at the time, before it became International Association of Athletics Federations, then decided that they wanted to take control of the coaching program and develop the coaching structure. And so they came on board. And at the same time that they came on board, within the NACAC formed a coaches body called the NACAC Track and Field Coaches Association, hence the second item, then NACAC TACFA, which still exists. And our host today, Richie Mercado, is one of the leading lights in that organization. And they have been continuing with special focus sessions as well as an annual congress for coaches who have come through the coaching fraternity over the years. So the IAAF developed the program. They took it from NACAC and insisted that we should follow their lead. And they developed initially a three level system. Then they changed it to a 5-level system. And now, more recently, now that we have World Athletics, and just before it became known as World Athletics, the IAAF then reverted to a 3-tier system. And that is what obtains at present. What we are trying to do here with NACAC is to offer a pre-level 1 program, which is the course that you are now attending, because it was felt by a number of our professionals, our experts, that it's unfair to get you straight into track and field coaching per se at the level 1 stage without a basic understanding of the fundamentals. And hence, here we are with this program. Just to let you know what the IAAF or World Athletics program looks like, we can go to the next slide where we show you the next. What we now have is the old level 1 has been merged. Level 1 and level 2 have been merged to the new level 1. What used to be the old level 3 is now level 2. And what was old level 4 is now level 3. So level 5 has essentially been taken off the grid, as it were. So these are the 3 levels that World Athletics is now projecting for development. Next slide. So the level 1, go ahead. It allows you to cover all the events. It's focusing on youths on the 16 level. And the material we use will really be what we call run, jump, throw, and the introduction to coaching manuals. So it is, yes, it is basic, but we felt that this introductory program that we are now doing with you prepares you for that level 1, which is a little bit more complex, a little bit more science-based, and nonetheless, we thought critically important. Level 2, the new level 2 deals with mostly under 20 athletes, and the focus is on track and field, applied sports science. It looks as event groups, what we call event specialization, so that in level 1, you are doing general introduction to athletics, track and field competition, and coaching. And level 2, we are looking more at event groups. So you have the throws, you have sprints and hurdles, you have relays, you have the horizontal and vertical jumps, yeah? And there are a lot more theory and practicals. And then we go to level 3, which is essentially elite coaching, high-level performances, again, applied sports science. And those are the 3 levels that we are using going forward. So this is our way of introducing you to track and field coaching. We have a number of qualified professionals dealing with the various presentations over the 5-week period. We are proud of your eagerness to be part of this. We're happy that you can join us, and we hope you will stay the distance, because we believe that at the end of the session, we would want to be confident that you will be going forward to level 1 and that you will stay with us through till level 3. So thank you very much. Welcome and enjoy today's session. Thank you, Richie.
Thank you. All right, let me stop share for a second. I'm still admitting people. If you give me 1 second, the person that was supposed to be helping me with this has not gotten on yet. All right, so what I'm going to do is, and again, let me tell you some basics again. This is being streamed live right now on Facebook. It's in the chat somewhere here. I think I can put it back up here again. So in case you get bumped out because of your internet service, or if somebody is saying, hey, how do I get in? And it's too late to register and me do the stuff because I don't have time to do that right now, they can get on and look at it. So that's right there. You might save that somewhere right now in case you need to get on. Also, at any time, you can put in a question, and at the end of each of the 2 sections, we're going to have time for questions. So if that makes sense, and I know some of you, I'm going to try to keep letting you in if you get bumped out and have to get back in, and hopefully I'm going to get a friend to do that when he gets on. Not on yet. All right, so I'm going to go and share screen and get going on my presentation. Can people see? Give me a thumbs up if you can see that and hear that. You hear me fine? Okay, good. All right, so I'm gonna go back to here. All right, so we're gonna talk today about energy systems and methods of training. And again, we're gonna be fairly general. We may get into some examples, but keep this pretty general and maybe introduce you to the similar terminology. That's one hope of coaching education around the world and in each region, is that there's a similar terminology. A lot of times coaches may mean the same thing, but if they use different terminology, it gets a little confusing. All right, so energy systems. We're going to talk about the body and as a complex living machine that we are attempting as coaches to get to produce performances. The anatomy is basically the structure and organization of the body, how it's put together, the skeletal system, the muscular system, the venous system, the cardiovascular system, everything in there. And the physiology is basically discussing and learning about how the body responds and functions. So how it functions on a day-to-day and how it responds to changes in what we're going to call stress or loads that we put on as coaches. Exercise physiology is the study of how the body functions and the changes that occur as a result of body exercise. Pretty simple. It started with studies of how people worked and how work affected them. It's now been used to, let me start my clock here. It's now been used in this century more to study activity and specifically exercise of athletes of all types. Basic physiological differences occur between individuals, not just because of age and experience, but because of how they're built, because of gender. And so those are obviously something you need to take into account when we're talking about training. Knowing how the body produces energy from muscular contraction means you can plan training. If you know what you're trying to do, you can create training that will elicit that type of activity for the body, that type of response, and that type of adaptation in order to improve. And muscles work like engines. They burn fuel from food to produce the energy for movement. This is not going to be a discussion of nutrition. We have that in a few weeks. But obviously, how fuel is burned and when it's burned and in what ways can help us in how we set up training. Nutrition, obviously important, but for athletes in training and how coaches organize it, it's important to understand how that fuel is being used. And energy comes from metabolic pathways, and we're not going to get too much into the science, which is good because I'm not a physiologist, but we're going to talk about what those basic types of pathways are that help produce the energy needed for different types of movement. Fuel sources produce this in three principal ways. And basically, when you go out there and perform, no matter what event, what sport, you're producing energy, utilizing it, and expressing that, meaning putting the motion into the movement that actually is what you're doing, whether you're a sprinter, a jumper, a hurdler. And they're metabolic sources, and the main metabolic sources are very important for that ultimate energy that we express in movement, and they come from three metabolic energy systems. And those three systems are the ATP-CP system. It's also known as the alactic system because there's not a high production of lactate as a result of it. This is short, up to about 10 seconds of very high intensity activity. Think of this as sort of startup energy. It also fatigues very quickly. The muscles fatigue very quickly because they can't keep producing this because there's not much of this in the system. So there's not much fuel available for this type of alactic activity. It's capable of operating without oxygen, and no or little lactate or acid is produced. In other words, things that would inhibit your activity. The lactate system is the second one, glycolytic lactate system, which is the system that's capable of operating with no oxygen uses fuel stores and produces, depending on the level and the time, produces large amounts of lactate and makes the body acidic, which helps impede performance. This is kind of the link between the ATP short time span system and the aerobic system. The aerobic system is the sustained energy system. It uses oxygen and fuel stores, can literally go on forever, is not very powerful, does not create tremendous muscular contraction or intense activity, but it's sustainable for long periods of time. I'll briefly mention this. There's a misperception often in literature and discussions about training that lactic acid is what causes you to not be able to continue running fast at the end of a 400. Lactic acid is what makes you sore the next day or days after. And those things are, okay, I'll try to change my volume. Check your volume there. Any better now? Okay, let me pause for a second and let in a participant here. Well, I'll let him in a second. I'll just speak louder. Okay, can you hear me now? Better? Be like the phone ad. Better? Okay, I just need to speak louder. All right. So lactic acid is usually blamed for impeding performance in real intense activities like 400 meters, 800 meters. It's blamed for the tightness. It's blamed for the soreness the next day or two, when really lactic acid immediately disassociates or separates into lactate and hydrogen ions. And the lactate actually is used as a fuel source and helps with production of more energy. Not very efficiently. It doesn't produce a lot compared to the other types of energy, but it can be reutilized for energy. The hydrogen ions that are released create acidity in the system, and that is what basically causes problems with tightness, tying up at the end of intense races, and then the soreness for the next couple of days is usually delayed onset muscle syndrome, where tiny micro tears in the muscles and muscular soreness you're feeling that has nothing to do with the lactates. The goal then of lactate type training is to have the system trained to learn how to better resynthesize the lactate for energy and produce more energy at intense levels, and also buffer the acid so that you're not impeded as much at the end of a race. And that's a long-term process. All right, here's a nice graphic that shows you sort of a time span along the top of 0 to 10 seconds, this ATP creatine phosphate system. Very short, 2 to 10 seconds, high intensity, capable of operating with no oxygen, and it doesn't produce anything that impedes performance in that short time span. It is, however, very short in range, and that energy runs out very quickly, so that you can't continue with that. You then transfer into the lactate system for, let's say, a 200 meters up to an 800 meters, and the lactate system then allows you to go more intense for longer, does not need oxygen, but it produces things that make the system more acidic, and which is an impeding factor in terms of somebody running intensely for 30, 40, 50, 60 seconds, a minute and a half, 2 minutes. The aerobic system then, from 3 minutes on to 2 hours plus, is a sustained energy system using oxygen and fuel stores in the muscles and fat that are there and continue to be used. Does not create high power, but it can go on for long periods of time. Metabolic energy systems, they all work together continuously. You don't shift like gears in a car from one to the next. There are times you use one more than other. And the relative contribution of energy from each system to a particular physical activity depends on the energy requirements, and that depends on the intensity and duration of the exercise. In other words, different events therefore emphasize different energy systems. Take, for example, the shot put. You know, a second and a half going across the ring and very explosively and intensely exploding to deliver the shot. ATP CP system does not produce anything that inhibits system there, is almost entirely, well, it is entirely that first system. On the other hand, you've got something like the 400 meters, which starts off at that initial burst of energy and then relies on the lactate system, although there is a big contribution to the aerobic system as well. Even up to the marathon, there is some lactate going on, but the majority of something like a marathon is aerobic. Sorry, I'm still admitting people were doing this. Here's another simple graphic that shows the short power speed events. Sorry, I'm having to stop and let people in as I talk. And then in the middle here, the ATP, CP, and lactate going into things like 200, 800, 400 hurdles, and then aerobic and lactate all the way 1,500 meters to the marathon. All right, they don't work independently, but it still is important that each system is developed and aimed at on its own, and then aimed at in training that will develop all of them together. High quality speed and power work for the first ATP CP alactic system, and now enough rest for recovery and replenishment of the creatine phosphate, which is the main energy source for that short burst of energy. The thing is, you may need a little longer, 2 to 3 minutes. You may need a little longer for the nervous system also to recover, because these are high intense movements, and the neuromuscular system, the nervous system, needs to recover in between repetitions as well. There are going to be more specific examples of this next week when we talk about the types of actual training to do. The lactate system, repetition training, fartlek, higher level circuits, higher energy circuits. After entering puberty and beyond, there's really not much benefit of doing lactate type training, heavy duty, intense lactate training for real young ages, because they don't have the physiological development, especially in terms of enzymes, to really have a benefit from it. And then the aerobic system, steady state endurance training, 20 to 30 minutes or longer, even any type of dynamic warm up and warm down, dynamic activity involving movement can do that. Let's say for a sprinter, instead of going on a 20 to 30 minute training run, to add the aerobic, which has some benefit, but not a lot necessarily. The whole aggregate of a warm up and warm down through the week is dynamic activity, which is mostly aerobic. So you have some contribution of that. Again, another chart here that can show you kind of the difference. Go through, 0 to 10 seconds for one, 20 to 80 meters for a distance, maximal intensity, 3 to 4 repetitions, maybe with 2 to 3 minutes recovery, maybe a little more, 1 to 4 sets, and then recovery between sets. For lactate training, 10 seconds up to 2+ minutes, 80 to 600 meters, 80 to 100% effort, 1 to 5 repetitions, 30 seconds to 10 minutes recovery. And you're probably thinking, well, that's a big range, 30 seconds to 10 minutes, 80 meters to 600 meters. Well, here's what you can do. You can aim at it from both directions. You can go very intense, let's say 350 meters 4 times at 95 to 100% intensity with 10 minutes recovery. On the other hand, you can do something like 200 meters, 2 sets of 6 times 200 meters with only 30 seconds recovery, where the pace is not too fast. It's still sprinting, but it's very relaxed sprinting. the recovery is minimal, so the incomplete recovery doesn't allow the lactate and everything to be fully cleared, so it forces you to keep going and build up more of it. And maybe 5 minutes between the sets, so you can actually aim at that from both directions. And then aerobic, any distance up to 60 plus minutes, continuous running, broken up with short rests, but very light, 50 to 80%, anything from steady running to repetitions and so forth. Okay, the energy for movement. We're talking about is energy production, management, utilization, and expression. In terms of the metabolic sources we talked about, those make a great contribution. There's also a great contribution from neuromuscular and kinetic energy. Kinetic sources are important, and this has often been overlooked by coaches and coaching programs. Traditionally, athletes and coaches have concentrated on the energy systems, metabolic systems, different volumes and intensity of exercise. What you can do is focus on neuromuscular training and biokinetic energy to help with creating extra energy. So increasing biokinetic energy production and increasing the contribution, that would mean you can require less for the metabolic energy, or more importantly, you increase that biokinetic energy, and with the same contribution of metabolic energy, you perform better. It's added value, and in terms of the kinetic energy and working on the kinetic system, lining things up better movement, you also prevent injury. Developing all three of the metabolic energy systems is important. Developing the biokinetic energy system is important. And something that is become more important in the last 20, 30 years, talking about neuromuscular training and this kinetic chain, how to line up the system better and how to stimulate the nervous system, intra and intermuscular coordination, recruiting more of the fibers in each motor units in each muscle fiber, and even the energy contribution from soft tissues, which all together help to produce more energy if done properly. Doesn't matter what you're doing metabolically, if you have a weak kinetic chain and you don't recruit the proper muscular contractions, you're not going to have good performance. All right, I'm going to open this up for questions right here. I'm going to stop sharing the screen for a second and look at this. And sorry about the volume, trying to get this going. Okay, I've got, looking at questions here. Reading through the chat here. People from all over. Somebody asking who would be sent the recordings. The recordings are actually on a drive that I can, let me do that right now before I forget. If everybody stays with me for a second while I cut and paste that link. This will take me a minute. Okay, I'm putting it in here. This link will give you the ability to get in there and view any PowerPoints and view any videos. So And then somebody asked, would the presentation be provided through email? No, it will actually be posted up there for you to view on that link that I just sent. Okay, and Sue Humphrey has been one of my mentors for years, and said more information on biokinetics. I can refer you to Peter Thompson because he's done a lot of research on that. But basically, it's kind of a neuromuscular. It's lining up the kinetic chain properly, utilizing soft tissues, not just tendons, but also fascia that connects different parts of the body, and using the stored energy in the fascia and the tendons as well as the muscles to produce more energy. So proper posture, proper movement, proper contact with the ground, and proper forces. You don't just have the metabolic energy in there, but you have more stored energy that you're using. Not just the old stretch reflex notion of the muscles, which stretch and reflex, but the notion of the tendons and the fascia actually adding a lot to that. But only if you're in right positions and if you work to develop that. And so that's a little higher level than the basis presentation, but that's what that's referring to. Okay, a little more. Someone asked about lactate change to energy. If you're performing very intensely, let's say like a 400 meters, and you start building up, and generally from 40 to 45 seconds, you get to the point at real high. Let's say you're competing at 400 meters. That point at 40 to 45 seconds, you build up so much acid, or the system becomes so acidic because the hydrogen ions released when the lactic acid breaks up into the lactate and the hydrogen. You also have neuromuscular fatigue setting in. You get to the point where you feel your butt, your quads, your hamstrings, everything is bursting, tying up, and it slows you down. You still can resynthesize some of that lactate for energy production. You just don't do it very efficiently, and you can keep providing energy, but oftentimes the inhibitory effect of the system becoming so acidic prevents the muscles from working properly anyway. That's one reason why when people do that, they feel nauseous and they vomit at the end in a workout or a thing. It's the acidity of the system, and a lot of that acid ends up getting dumped into the stomach. So at a lower level where you're producing lactate and the hydrogen ions, let's say you're running submaximal, but you're running hard enough to create lactate and to create that hydrogen ions, making the system more acidic, you actually can help clear some of that lactate, or make some of that lactate transform into some energy, and you can learn how to buffer the system, not you, but the body learns how to buffer that hydrogen acidity better. And that depends, that's one reason why instead of running an intense 350 meters all out 3 or 4 times with 10 minutes rest, if you run something like 200 meters several times fast, but not that fast, have shorter recovery, even an active recovery where you maybe jog a little bit, you're teaching the system to create lactate and reuse it for energy, resynthesize it to create more energy, and to get that hydrogen in there, hydrogen ions, to make the system more acidic, and have to buffer it to help it to where it gets stable. So about 30 minutes after a real intense thing like 400 meters, you've not only resynthesized some of that energy, but you've buffered the hydrogen, you feel better, and your muscles aren't tight anymore. Well, if you do it a little less intensely, you can create the lactate, you can create the acidity, and actually train the body to buffer it better and to produce more energy. That's my layman's term of it. I was not good at chemistry, so there's some things you can look at to research that on your own. Oh, and the presentation, Keith said, will also be available on the NACAC website. Athletics NAC, I keep the link there. The book mentioned, did I mention that too, or which book? I'm going to unmute you for a second.
At the very beginning, he said track and field, applied sports science, or in those in the diagrams about levels, track and field, applied sports science.
His presentation. Let me look. I'm looking right
in
here.
Keith's
applied, yeah, track and field applied sports science is what it's called. I'm going to cut and paste that.
Yeah, where do we get that?
I have no idea. I'm putting that in here for everyone. That was cut and pasted from that, yeah, from his. Okay, here, high levels of lactic acid can become life-threatening, right? Lactic acid, not usually in a normal person with no problem. Yes, in severe cases of somebody with conditions, lactic acidosis, which is the creation of so much the system can't do it, and that can be threatening to organs and function and life. That's, if someone can't tolerate that and they are diagnosed with some condition, they probably can't be an athlete in that type of sport. A normal athlete, no, it doesn't get to that point, because the reason why that acidity builds up is because your brain and your body are telling you to quit running or to slow down. They're telling you, my system can't tolerate this any longer. I'm not going to let you keep running this fast. And that's a great question, because it's a natural system. Now, can somebody keep running anyway? Well, usually not. Part of the process of training is to both be able to resynthesize energy better and learn how to buffer the acidity better, but also mentally to be able to tolerate that a little more. People call it like lactate tolerance, to be able to tolerate and mentally push through anyway. And it's not, that doesn't make it life-threatening. But yes, that's in certain conditions, people have that. Yes, that can be a problem. All right, I'm gonna look and see, because we're doing fine on time, if there's any other question here. How often do you train per week, or the recommendations recovery time? We're going to mention that a little more in the next lecture. I'm going to start in a couple minutes, and next week there'll be more details on that, and that's more examples that'll be given at higher level courses. All right, so I am going to go ahead and go back to share screen and see if I can find my getting to the right point here. Okay, you seeing that again, Keith? Thumbs up if you're seeing it. All right. Principles of training. So we're going to talk a little bit about actual training principles that apply with how you set up the training, not just based on the physiology, but based on some other principles that become very important in the program. And first, we can talk about why we train and what is fitness. You know, fitness, first of all, is the state of the health of the body and mind at any given time. Like, you go to the doctor, you're not necessarily an athlete. You go to the doctor, they check your blood pressure, they check your weight, and they tell you where you are. They check your heart rate, they may do some blood tests, and they say, okay, this is what your health is. And your aim usually is to have them say, you're healthy. The health of the body and mind at a given time is what fitness is. We also use it in athletics terms. Fitness is, we want to improve fitness. We want to improve the general function of your body systems. We want to improve your health, and we want to know that we are improving the things that we're trying to improve. So fitness is the health and state of the body at any given time. So an example is someone starts, let's say you have a 9 or 10-year-old come out for the first time. You can tell they're not very active. The parents maybe say they're not very active. I want them to get involved in athletics. They may be a little overweight. That may be because they're not active. That may be because their body hasn't developed yet. They may not have done much activity, and they may have a hard time at first. They may be breathing hard really first in small activities. They may not have much general strength to do even a simple thing like a push-up or run very fast or very long. So what you can do though is after, let's say, 8 weeks of a fun athletics program to teach basics, by the end of that, they're already much better. They've already adapted. You can tell they perform more healthily. They feel better. They may not say they feel better, but they're having fun, and they're probably having an easier time doing the activities. So at the end of that, their fitness level has improved. When we're talking about athletes at a higher level, you might have an athlete you work with year round. After a month or 6 weeks off, they come in and their fitness might not be what it should be, but they've been resting. At the start, your goal is to get them back to that fitness or even improve it from the end of the year before. Maybe you test it to see where they are. Then after 3 months, you might test them again with certain types of running tests, or even checking their body mass, even checking what they do in the weight room to see if they're becoming more fit. Then when they start competing, competition tells you how fit you are for your specific activity. Other tests can be done later. And then later on at the end of the season, the peak of the season, you want to know how fit they are. At different times during the year, they should be getting more fit and into the actual fitness that they need to perform their best. Now, what is training? Training is obviously the basis of everything. And I cut and pasted this from the Spanish and translated it from Oscar Gadea, who gave this lecture the other night. A systematic and complex pedagogical process with the purpose of elevating the performance of the athlete in order to achieve and express their maximum physical, technical, tactical, and psychological potential, and allow this to occur at the most appropriate time in relation to their maturity and level of skills. Training is to get people to perform when it's time to perform. So it's well said in that. And what we're talking about as a coach in terms of training is how to set up a systematic training process in order to do this. 3 important principles of training. The first, the principle of overload. Second, principle of reversibility. And the third, the principle of specificity. These are important to understand at all times in training. And it's actually good, depending on the level of your athletes and maturity, intellectual maturity, as you've been with them for long, to have them understand these. The principle of overload, right? You start off with, this is time going from left to right. You provide a stimulus, a workout. Let's say you run several 300s fairly fast, decent recovery. They get fatigued. You have stressed that system. The system is basically fatigued, and so the level is way down here, the fitness level at that specific time after that workout, and that may be for a day or 2 later. Then their recovery here is the compensation. Over that time period, 2 days, 3 days, their system recovers, and then we'll end up at a little higher state than it was before you applied it 2 or 3 days earlier. This is the adaptation. And this is what we call overcompensation. Your system is overcompensating for this activity. If you sit on the couch 8 hours a day, you were perfectly fit to sit on the couch. If you then go out and walk 5 miles the next day, you're tired, you're beat. So your system is going to make sure over the next couple of days it recovers, so you're able to do that more easily. it overcompensates and allows you to be able to do that. So your system trains to what you do. After the adaptation overcompensation, then you've got a new level of fitness. Now, over the next few days, though, if you don't do anything to apply another stimulus, you may return back to that original level. So here you've got a little more detailed chart. The stimulus is applied on this day. You fatigued. You recover over the next 2-3 days. Recovery means active recovery, lighter exercise, rest, whatever. You end up here with the overcompensation. And then right about here, maybe in time-wise, you apply another stimulus that repeats this process. But if they're first starting out and you say, okay, we're not going to do as many of these, we'll do them a little lighter and see what kind of shape you're in, it doesn't fatigue them as much. And when they recover, they may get a little better, but you didn't apply enough stress to make their system say, I have to recover and overcompensate for that heavy stress. So they don't really add that much. That's all right, because then you can learn they can handle more. On the other hand, if you hit them too hard, you keep doing it, or you do it with too much in one session or day after day, they get so fatigued, the system is so destroyed that even after 2, 3, 4 days, it still hasn't recovered. And so the worst thing is you've really hurt the system too much and it doesn't do them much benefit. But what often happens is right about here, when you're used to, okay, 3, 4 days, you hit them with another training when they're right here. I hope you can see the arrow, and it makes it worse. So this principle of progressive overload, and I'm going to do this. Keith, thumbs up. Can you see my cursor that I'm moving around? Keith, the little cursor, can you see it? Okay, good. I want to make sure. So you increase the loads over time. This might be every 3 or 4 days. This might be week to week. But what you get is you get that stress, the fatigue, the recovery and compensation. You have another stressor here, the fatigue, the recovery and compensation, a sort of stair-step process, which is not as neat and simple as this chart diagrams. And again, this could show what's happening over every 3 days. This could show what's happening over every week. This could actually demonstrate what you're trying to do every month over time. But progressive overload, optimal improvement. On the other hand, if there's incomplete adaptation, you provide a stress before they've recovered, either because the first one was too intense or you didn't give enough time before the second one. Inadequate recovery and adaptation, you just keep hitting the system and getting it worse. And that leads to overtraining, which obviously is a bad thing for the system, for the mental confidence, for everything, because they don't perform well, they don't feel well, their workouts are terrible, their competitions are terrible. It becomes a mental and emotional stress. And oftentimes in this process, one of these sessions you do right here leads to injury, maybe either an injury that day, an actual injury that day, or something that happened here when they're tired and you're still stressing them that later on, a week and a half later, becomes an injury. The principle of reversibility. All right, so we've looked at all this, but right here is where you've kind of recovered and you're at your best. Then if you wait 3, 4 days to apply another stress, you kind of revert back to what you were before, instead of applying that stress right here at the optimal time to go through this process all over again. So if you get in good shape for a workout, you recover, you feel better, you're a little stronger, and then you wait too long to do anything else, or you're in good shape and you take 2 weeks where you do nothing, you go back to your original fitness, or maybe over time a little below it. If you don't use it, you lose it. This principle of specificity. The specific nature of the load produces its own specific responses and adaptations. That means the more specific the training is in terms of the time, the intensity, the activity, the movement, the more similar it is to the actual event they're training for, the better the adaptation. Cross training or doing other things in the off season, during times of injury, are great, but they're not very specific. I have an example right now. I have some of my cross country distance athletes who are here in Houston where it's hot, so they don't want to run. They stay inside and they ride their exercise bike inside, or they get in a pool and they swim, or they're in somewhere with nicer climate and mountains and they're hiking. That's great. Cross training helps develop energy systems. Your heart doesn't know, your cardiovascular system doesn't know whether you're running on the ground, biking on a bike, swimming in a pool. It still pumps. Now, it may not be able to pump the same way without all the use of the muscles, but it's still pumping. So you can develop energy systems and you can maintain them to some way, but it's not very specific to the training for athletics. Biking is not very similar to running. So for a off season, it's not bad to do, but if that's all you do, that's not really going to help the running too much. If you're injured, biking may be the only thing you can do, and that's great. It's less similar to running than something like an elliptical or running in a pool. An elliptical is a running motion, at least, with limited contact. So if you're injured, that's still fine. It's a little more specific. So you can do workouts in off season or in recovery or in rehab doing elliptical or pool running. But here's what happens a lot of times with athletes at a higher level in off season, or they want to, take 2 weeks off. Well, hiking is not running. Jumping rope is not long jumping. Yoga is not hurdling. It may be fine. You may want them to do those kind of things for a while, but when it gets back to it, you have to do things that are specific to your event. And per this reversibility principle, injured athletes use fitness and specific training over time. So any training rehab should be as specific as possible and as tolerated. In other words, if they're not allowed because of the type of injury to use an elliptical or even an exercise bike, they can't do that. But if they are and they can tolerate it, doing workouts is specific, just like the running workouts. They can be mimicked on bikes, they can be mimicked on ellipticals, they can be mimicked in a pool. If you have access, you may not have access, but if you do, that means once they're healed and able to come back, they haven't lost so much of the energy fitness, but they also haven't lost that specific movement. And there have been some high cases, and I can't remember her name, Ana Guevara from Mexico, who lost in, I can't remember which Olympics, was second in the Olympics to the Bahamian, who was a great 400-meter sprinter too. But Guevara spent something like 6-8 weeks without running on a track, doing intense pool and bike workouts because of an injury. And she came there and she got the silver medal in the Olympics. And I've had athletes we've done that with for either recovery to keep from avoiding running too much because of problems, or injury rehab. And they can get along without losing as much as if you don't try to do that. All right, I'm going to give my example here of gardening and training, an analogy. I love rosemary and basil. I use them in a lot of things we cook and eat. I frequently fail at training them. This is the actual rosemary bush in a pot in my front yard, which is either dying right now or hopefully recovering. How much sun and water they need? How many hours a day? Maybe here they need less sun than they do in a cooler climate. How much water they need? How often between? How frequently do you water? Too much water drowns them and they die. Not enough water when it's really hot in the sun, they dry out and die because of that. Pinching and cutting, pruning bushes and things to help them grow better, to help them develop more and be more shapely. A basil plant grows tall and stocky and it falls over. You have to pinch and prune it and you get to use the things you're cooking, but that creates more growth. The plant is healthier and it's bushier and it's more stable. In other words, that's like what we do with athletes. We're applying, training, we're applying sun, we're applying water, we're pruning and cutting to get rid of bad habits of movement, put in good habits of movement. And the key is the ultimate success comes with careful application of the proper dose of training water, sun, and pinching in the case of these plants, and the proper intervals of application and rest. When you do it and when you don't do it, and when you let it rest and recover. Hopefully I've been more successful as a coach than growing things in the garden. All right, the body is capable of adapting to training loads. Training loads of the correct volume, intensity, and timing can cause overcompensation, which you want. That's good. Stress is good. Physical stress on the system is good. The right type at the right time. The correct volume, intensity, and timing cause that overcompensation, which makes the fitness level higher. The training loads that increase progressively cause repeated overcompensation and higher levels of fitness. There's no increase in fitness if loading is always the same or too far apart. In other words, as you saw in those waves earlier, if you apply a stimulus, your training workout, and it fatigues them, and then they recover and they're better, if you keep applying that same workout the same way at the same volume and same intensity, they'll get used to it really quickly and they'll feel easy, but it's not going to stress them enough to make them get better. So you have to actually apply more stress, have them be faster, have them maybe do more of them, have them do a little longer so the volume and intensity can change. Maybe the time for recovery is reduced. There are ways to manipulate that. You know, the whole key of this, and I didn't say it yet, I know most of you have heard it, this we're talking about is kind of the science and the principles based on the science. But the key is, as a coach working with athletes, how you apply it is the art of it. You have to understand the science and the principles, but you have to apply it through sort of artistic ways. And some of it's trial and error and experience over the years. Overtraining or incomplete adaptation occurs when training loads are too great or done too close together and too soon. I have a mentor of mine who's been a high-level coach for over 40 years and who has coached many Olympians, many medalists, even world record holders. And he said when he first started coaching, when he's a high school athlete, a new coach was there and he said, well, we're going to run 6 times 400 meters today. Just run as hard as you can. We'll give you some rest. They ran that and they're throwing up. They're miserable. They're tired. They're sore. And the next day they come back and the coach goes, well, that seemed to really have really work y'all hard. So we're going to do the same thing today. So the next day they ran 6 times 400 meters and they all, they got better at it. They got used to it, but it wasn't the right thing applied the right way with the right recovery. Adaptation is specific to the specific nature of the training. If you're a jumper, you need to do things to help your speed and power to help you jump better. Principles of individualization. Each individual has different capacities to train and adapt to that training, and each individual will respond differently. So you can't use the cookie cutter method very often. Different athletes respond to the same training in different ways. And there's no such thing as one ideal training program that will produce optimal results for everyone. Yes, there are lots of times, and it happens with me in my school system, where we have a lot of kids, for example, a cross-country program. We may have 50 boys in there. We have the same basic training program that all of them follow, but there are different levels that each of them do. The number of repetitions, the distances might be different, the recoveries might be different. The training looks the same in what we're doing, but it's applied differently to what's appropriate to their level. And even some of the ones who are the best ones, maybe more experienced, one who is better adapted to running really fast, but can't handle a lot of volume of distance, works more on that. He may run really fast paces and not have many repetitions. One who is not quite as fast, but really responds to more distance, may do more volume of things. And that doesn't mean you don't treat their weaknesses either. It just means you train them to what really helps them perform better. Factors to consider include heredity. I had a jumper one time who came over and he said, oh, I thought I was going to have a good day and I jumped pretty well, but this guy beat me. And I said, I know. He goes, he just went down there and I think he was 15 years old at the time and jumped 23.5 feet. And I said, Lee, don't get too worried about it. He's a good kid. He's worked hard, but his parents are both Olympians. It was the son of Leroy and Michelle Burrell. And Leroy was a world record holder at one point. I was like, you know, he inherited his talent the good old fashioned way, mom and dad. You can't train heredity, but that is a factor because some people might not be as blessed as that person, and you have to train to help them nevertheless. The biological or developmental age, you might be 10 years old, but you might be developed like a 12-year-old, you might be like an 8-year-old. Gender, at younger ages, there actually aren't as many differences in gender. Once puberty onsets and then completes, there are a lot of differences in how you, in the differences between males and females, how they respond to training, and maybe even some of the types of things. And that's not to say that women can't do more. Actually, one example, and I'm not going to elaborate, is they can handle a little more intense speed and power training close to competitions when they're like 18 to 22 ages than the guys can. The guys kind of need to rest. The girls can handle more of that. It helps some of them perform better. Also, training age. Someone is 16 years old, has been doing athletics since they're 8, is pretty experienced, has done a lot of the training. And then someone is 16 years old and it's their first year out there and they've never done anything. They have completely different training age. So that has to be taken into account. They can't just be thrown in and do everything the other one has done because their body has not gone through those experiences and that development. Here's just a graphic example. Athlete 1 and 2, the same age. Their biological age may be completely different. You know, one looks really young, has not developed as much yet. The other one, maybe because heredity, maybe because of the level of development, looks like they're 13 years old already. You know, that a boy might already have hair growth, facial growth at 11 or 12, and another one doesn't have it when he's 16. And their training age may be completely different. And another example here, someone is 12, someone is 15. They both look like they're the same age. You look at them physically, they both look like and appear in movement like they're the same age, and they've both been training for at the same time. That doesn't necessarily mean they're capable of doing the same thing. Okay, so it's important to know about the athletes and know how much they've done and understand where they are. They might be 15 years old, but they might not be biologically ready or have the training behind them to be ready to do something that another 15-year-old has. Training is a long-term process and must be enjoyable for the athlete and for the coach. You know, we talk a lot of times about, you know, athletes who get burned out, and in the United States, especially, too much activity and little club sports when they're young. By the time they're in high school, they're tired of sport, they're burned out. I know a whole lot of coaches who get burned out. And you hear about that at college levels and professionals. It's tough. So it's got to be enjoyable for the athlete and the coach. You have to love what you're doing. And I think a complete hit or miss, haphazard way is going to cause more problems than understanding the process, doing your best, knowing you may fail, and learning from it and enjoying it, and enjoying watching the athletes improve. Variety increases enjoyment. Variety makes things a little more fun, and actually the body adapts better to variety. The physiological system, the nervous system, coordination, the more variety you have, the more you're able to do something. I used to use this example years and years ago when somebody would say, oh, I'm right-handed, so I can't do this with my left arm, or I'm right-footed, so I can't kick the ball with my left foot in soccer. And so I'd tell them, go home and brush your teeth. If you're right-handed and you brush your teeth really fast, pick up the toothbrush, put a big wad of toothpaste on it, and brush as fast as you can. Well, first, you probably can't brush very fast. Second, it's probably going up your nose and in your ear and all over the place because you don't have the specific coordination. If you did that, I know kids don't do it 3 times a day, but if you did it 1 time a day with your left hand for a month, you'd walk in one morning tired, you'd pick up the toothbrush and you'd do it and you wouldn't even notice because you've adapted the coordination there. And any type of variety of movement, variety of exercise, variety of energy use allows the system to adapt and get better and get more balanced. It also increases the training effect for things I just said there. Variety increases the training effect, not just because of mental boredom, but also physiologically and mechanically in terms of your nervous system and muscles. You can change the nature of the exercise, do different types of jumping drills, or do jumping drills in the grass, do jumping drills over hurdles, do them in the sand. You can change the environment, meaning you can anything from running on grass or sand instead of on a track to running at a different location. We do this a lot in cross country. In track, people think, well, it's on the track, we're right here. You can run from one side to the other instead of the way you always run. You can run another direction if it's not a real high velocity sprint. You can run against the wind every now and then. Again, I'm used to that mentally and physically. You can change the surface, you can change everything there. You can turn around and move the pit and high jump a different direction than always where you've done it for the whole year. The time of day of the session could be a variety in there. The training group, moving who they're with. So you can do a whole lot of things to change it. You can actually also work on something such as simply the change of how you're doing it in terms of the metrics. And I'll give you an example we use in cross country and track here. In cross country, a lot of kids don't have a real good sense of their rhythm. A lot of the younger kids can't run very fast for very long. When they first start, they're not conditioned to be able to do it. Things like fartlek are hard for them to even push themselves. And so I started doing this years ago. We talk about running for tempo, and they count every time their left foot hits the ground, or their right foot, whichever, but don't count left, right. It's too much to count. So if every time your left foot hits, you count, you kind of start jogging, and wherever you want, through the grass, around the track, anywhere, no direction, anything you want, be creative. You start counting. When you get to 30, you say go, and you start counting. The group counts, and you hit 30 times, which is 60 steps. Upbeat, quick, fast, and relaxed. Not worrying about where you're going because you're in the middle of the grass, not worrying about the time, but thinking about the rhythm and keeping your rhythm and the other people's rhythm together. We try to group with that. And then when you get to the 30 of them, you ease up and you do easy 30 count. And then you go up again, up and down, up and down. It puts them in charge of what they're doing, gives them a sense of rhythm of what it means to run fast and relaxed. And it takes away the burden of I have to run from here to there in this time. In track, what we've done is, especially with sprinters and 200 meters, 400 meter runners, is we've done the same where we'll start off every 2-3 weeks with doing 20-second flies. And they'll do some training beforehand, some sprinting, but then they run 20 seconds as hard and relaxed as they can, as fast as relaxed as they can. And then they take 8-10 minutes rest, and they do it again, another 20. So 2 times 20-second flies we start with, and they'll say, well, how far do I run? It's like, as far as you go. Well, how fast do I run? As fast as you can, and be relaxed. Well, are you going to tell us when to stop? Yeah. Well, are we going to know how much time's left? No, don't worry about it. Don't worry about anything but being relaxed and running fast. And so when 20 seconds is up, we all stop, and they think, oh, I felt fast, and I wasn't feeling hurt. I didn't worry about the finish line. So that's another way you can just change up the whole concept of what they're doing. They don't have to get from point A to point B in a certain amount of time. They just run fast and relaxed. And we can change it up. You can do any amount of time. We go on and do 30-second ones and more, but that's just an example of something you can change up. And this is the other thing. The coach can be as creative as possible in this, and even take feedback from the athletes in the group. They may say, hey, why don't we do this? Playing, instead of doing an aerobic workout or aerobic recovery, play some type of game that's safe to do, that they could be involved in, that's fun, and they're moving. The energy system is getting going, and they're moving. All right. The principle of active involvement. The most important thing about it is that you have to have the athlete willingly involved and invested in it. You can have all the great training in the world. They can have all the talent in the world. They can do the work, but it's not going to ever click. They're not going to get much out of it if they really don't want to do it. You know, if the parents bring them there and they say, here, he doesn't want to do it, but we're making him do it. Well, they may change their mind. You may make it fun. You may talk to them. They may change. But if they still don't want to do it, it's not really worth your time, effort, and headache. And the kid doesn't want to do it. Higher level athletes sometimes get to the point they just don't want to do this anymore. They are tired of it. They want to do something else, or they want to take a break. Sometimes that's the best thing to do. I had a girl years ago who broke our school record and was one of the top in our state in the 300-meter hurdles. And she just started doing it that year. I told her, I was thinking about you. You know, the 200, you may not score very well or place. The 400, you know, I know you don't want to run that far. Let's try the hurdles. And it worked well, and she did very well. And the next year she came back, she goes, I don't want to do the hurdles anymore. She was scared of the hurdles, scared. I said, that's fine. And I said, okay. Well, we got through the season, we started going, and she was doing other things, and other people were hurdling, and one of them was hurdling pretty well. And after, you know, about halfway through this, she goes, well, I think I want to hurdle again. Okay, let's do it. Let's work on it. And she ended up breaking our school record that year, and being second in our state meet in the 200 hurdles. But it, you know, she didn't really want to do it. But then sometimes that's fine. Well, she ended up wanting to do it again because she got over the problems, and I think she really wanted to do well. So sometimes that'll happen. But you've got to find ways to get the athlete actively and willingly involved in what you're doing. Otherwise, it's a headache for you too. And over time, as the athlete matures, I'm not talking about an 8 or 9-year-old, and I'm not necessarily talking about a 16-year-old who's just started maybe, but as the athlete matures, not just physically in terms of fitness and performance, but also emotionally and mentally, and you've developed a relationship of coach athlete and trust there, the athlete should be more invested and involved in the training process. Not just in what's happening, but the athlete, you should be not giving them as much feedback technically. You should be asking them more about technically what do you feel is happening. They should know. You don't want to be spoon feeding them. Ask them, how is this training going? Oftentimes you get a really good athlete at that level, and you pull them in and say, okay, let's talk about what you think you need this year, and we can work that in, and we can try some things. And sometimes you might say, well, I don't think that'll work, but what about this? You kind of work together. You work together on the process. Definitely, you're talking about international level and elite athletes. That's vital. But I think even at high school level, 18, 22, that level, really they should be involved in it. First of all, they understand more about it. They're going to do better. And also participation, involvement, you know, the athlete's behavior, not just in the presence of the coach, but beyond that. So you're trying to make good people in here, not just build an athlete who performs well. And that goes into how you get a good example to them, and you talk to them about what you do in your lifestyle not only contributes to your success, but can also take away from it. We see examples all the time of high profile athletes, Olympians, professional athletes who do things that reflect badly on them. And, you know, they're the hero to somebody, and then they do something that's not very heroic and doesn't look very good. And that happens even on, you know, high schools and collegiate level, and, you know, in your federation where you are. So their lifestyle needs to be one that will help them become a better athlete in what they're trying to achieve. And also the way they interact with other people and the way they portray themselves, especially in the days of social media, has to be one that doesn't take away from what they've done. Not, you know, that doesn't embarrass the athlete, doesn't cause problems to the athlete, doesn't, you know, create issues that, you know, what I'm referring to there. And, you know, as part of your goal is to help them, you know, be responsible and expect responsibility and understand what's proper in not just in training and a competition, but what's proper in behavior. You know, you're equipping athletes to handle how they perform and how they're in big arenas, whether it's your local federation, your state, collegiate, or international. But you're also helping them learn about how that reflects on what they do later on in life. Methods of training. And next week, Chester Morgan is going to talk more about the specifics of training itself, but we're going to mention some of the things here And the first thing I'm going to put on here is this: active recovery and rest are part of the training. They're like, oh, well, we're not training today, we're just resting. No, that's part of training. It's like sleep is the most important part of your maintenance of your health status. You're awake, you're doing, oh, well, I'm just sleeping, it doesn't matter. No, sleep is very important. That's where you recover best. That's where young people do their growing. And athletes who have trained hard, that's where they recover better. The same thing for if it's a rest day, you're to do nothing on the rest day, that athlete should do nothing on that rest day. If it's active recovery, that may be with you in practice, that may be good warm up, some light, on grass, barefoot striding, maybe a light game, maybe some circuit training, but no hard contact, no hard, intense exercise, because you had hard training the day before, and it helps recovery, and it helps with that adaptation from that training before, getting you ready to be better for the next day of training. And if it's away from you, you may say, and I'll tell some kids on a weekend, okay, Saturday we have a competition, Sunday we're not going to meet, but do something active. Get on the bike, get in a pool, stretch out, jog lightly in the grass for a few minutes. Don't do a lot of pounding, but do that, and then good mobility and relax. Get in a bathtub with cool water if you don't have any water near you or a pool. Training should be general to specific, both from when kids are younger to when they're older, and within a season, whether it's 16 weeks or 24 weeks or 48 weeks. General things at first to get the athlete's fitness level up, and then more specific as you go along to get ready for competition later on. Needs to be appropriate to the age, ability, and the level of training, which we've discussed. Teaching them a thorough and having them understand the purpose of a thorough warmed up and warmed down are important. Active motions, dynamic movements, mobility exercises, and then following training, especially intense lactate training, moving the body around to help resynthesize that lactate and help try to clear some of that acidity out of the system. Dynamic flexibility exercises and mobility exercises before training, static maybe after training, or even at your own time, sometime, to help with range of motion. Those are all parts of things that you need to teach them in good habits and understand why they're doing it. In terms of running, you've got aerobic work that we talked about, alactic, short, intense work, jumping, hopping, sprinting, lactate work, neuromuscular training, things like speed development, power development, speed endurance, lactate tolerance, anaerobic threshold, aerobic threshold. I'm just throwing these terms out because Chester will talk more specifically next week about the types of training and the dynamics of how to do them. Strength development is important, but general specific. Even for young kids, it's always been a debate in the States, other places. They're 8 years old, they can't do strength development. I'm sorry, skipping, hopping over little sticks, that's strength. Doing push-ups, doing sit-ups, using their body weight, that's strength. Hopping and throwing, that playing, a lot of that is developing strength. Should they be using weights? No. But so general movements and things, more body weight, medicine balls, later on, more specific things, later on in training, later on in development age-wise, they can do actual weights, more plyometrics, jumping, bounding, powerful throwing, things like that as they get older and more developed. And a lot of those can be done in circuits. And then technical training, simple to complex, general to specific, gross movements to fine movements. Just gross movements in terms of for a thrower, a kid who's interested in throwing, a powerful, standing, powerful jump, an overhead backward throw, or a between legs forward throw with a medicine ball or a heavy shot. That's a powerful gross throwing movement for power in the legs. Then you get to more complex specific things, such as what's happening with the actual throwing motion and so forth. But younger kids, as much variety of movement as possible, and it doesn't have to be very specific to events. Can you go over a few things here and then we'll be done? We're not going to talk about all levels of training, but since a lot of you coach younger kids, with young athletes, age and development appropriate training methods. Don't look at a workout posted by the top sprinter in the world or the top jumper in the world and say, okay, I'm going to come back and give that to my 9-year-old kids. It's not going to work. They're not going to be able to do it. It's not going to be safe. For youth, activity and fun. And even my kids, I wouldn't call 15 to 18-year-olds youth, but sometimes we trick them into a good recovery. We pull the Frisbee out and we play Frisbee games, running around continuously, and they love it. Pull a soccer ball out and do soccer as recovery. Run and chase each other and tag each other. And if you get tagged, you do a sit-up and a push-up and a jumping jack, and then get up and run around some more and avoid being tagged. They're doing recovery. They're doing aerobic activity. They're doing a little strength. They don't finish say, oh, that feels really good. I feel more recovered. I know that was at my aerobic level. I've checked my heart rate. It's good. No, they were running around having fun. So even for high school level kids, we do that at times. You can definitely do that for young kids. Games can be active warm up and warm down. Skipping, jogging, hopping, fun tag games for warm up and warm down for young kids. They get aerobic running through games and activities. Any type of group game, you can create games, you can do traditional games. Alactic speed development. Okay, an 8-year-old, yes, can do training for alactic speed development. How? On the grass or on a track, you line them up, 20 meters apart, and you say, run as fast as you can, tag the kid in the other, he runs back. You go back and forth doing that. You can compete with different teams doing that. You can skip back and forth. You can crawl on all fours back and forth. You can, hop on one leg and then the other back and forth. You can do 30 meters. You can do 10 meters. You can do double leg hops doing it. They're having fun. You're doing short little release. You can put little stick barriers for hurdles, that are 12 inches high, and you can run over those back and forth. So you can do all sorts of things which are actually developing speed that are appropriate to that level, but they're having fun. Strength from body weight, skipping, jumping, throwing light balls, again, and then technical training, gross movements of all types, hurdling movement, jumping movement, throwing movement, sprinting movement, skipping movements are all kind of good general movements that later on play into what they're doing athletically. With the onset of puberty, different age for male and female and different kids, more specific and complex training can begin due to physiological development. You start developing the enzymatic systems to be able to actually develop the lactate production that you can benefit from at those ages. And it might be, different age for different kids, depending on when they start puberty. But before that, there's not really much benefit from doing it. Organized lactate training can be induced because of this. Fun and activity and games can still be part of the training process, but training, though it's broad-based, and again, Chester is going to talk about that in developing athletic abilities next week, still broad-based, running, jumping, throwing, hurdling, and avoid putting them into one area too early, saying, oh, you're just a thrower, you're just a jumper, you're just a distance runner. Have them do as much variety of training and activity as they can to build better, well-rounded athletes. Combined event or multi-event practices and even competitions are great. Have them do a sprint, a throw, a jump, a hurdle event, things like that in practice and in competition, even when they're younger, to get them more well-rounded as athletes. And avoid that specialization at too early an age. Keep the base and development movement as broad as possible at that level. And I think of two things. I'm not going to be able to think of his name, but in London Olympics, he and his brother were both world-class discus throwers from Germany. He won the discus, went and ripped his singlet apart, and then jogged around the track with the German flag on his back. And when he got around the backside, the whole crowd cheering for him, they had the hurdle set up for the women's 100-meter hurdle final. This is the women's Olympic 100-meter hurdle. And he was going outside of lane 8, and all of a sudden he just thought, hey, and he did a pretty good 5-step trail leg drill over all the hurdles, to the cheering of many, including cheering of some of the hurdlers. He was an athlete. he had probably grown up, developed hurdling and doing other things besides just being a thrower because he was big and strong. After puberty, and that ends at different ages, more advanced training can be introduced. Their physiological system is developed, their skeletal and soft tissue development has reached its maturity. In other words, their bones are fused, that they don't have as many risks of growth plate injuries and things like that. And you can do more advanced training, again, if it's appropriate for their training age and if you develop it gradually. High intensity neuromuscular training and full weight training can be implemented properly and progressively. And you're training to be able to compete at this level and beyond. I mean, that's really the goal of training, is competing, whether it's a high school level or a junior level, and then beyond. All right, I'm going to stop the share right there. Oh, thank you, Sue. Robert Harding. Yeah, Robert Harding and his brother, and Robert Harding. And you can find that video. So if you look Robert Harding, London Olympics, you'll find videos of him, because many people from the stands, an actual TV video of him doing a five-step trail leg drill over the hurdles. And every time my throwers say, well, we don't want to do any hurdling, we don't want to do this, we don't want to run any, we don't want to do any of that. It's like, okay, watch this guy. He's an athlete. All right, I am going to go up on the questions. Yeah, Anna Guevara, we have Tonique Williams-Darling, and Keith, she actually met me when I came to Bahamas a few years back for our NACAC Track and Field Coaching Congress, and I was ushered through customs on, by them. They had, knew we were coming, and I didn't have to wait at all, and I came through, and here this woman goes, "Hi, I'm here to greet you," and it's like, oh my gosh, you're one of my heroes. And so, yeah, Tonique Williams won that. Can cross training be used in early phase of the general preparation period? Or no, that's a great question, Dwight. Cross training can be used pretty much anytime, and cross training can be recovery. And as I said, sometimes, let's say it's even late in the season. And I've had some decathletes and heptathletes that I've worked with at their high school level that are gotten pretty good. One, to save their legs and their pounding, because they're doing a lot of activity to train for 10 events. We would, let's say he did a really hard, intense track workout, neuromuscular fatigue, buildup of acidity and everything, and we do a good recovery. Well, the next day we might do an active warm-up, gradual light on the grass, and then go in and get on an exercise bike. And it doesn't need to be a lot like running that day, so it doesn't matter if it's not very specific. We're just getting to pump blood through there and help clear out the other things that we built up from yesterday, get a little aerobic conditioning, and not make it hard, and be inside the air conditioning in the gym, because outside it's 100 degrees. And same thing for recovery. Even for a warm down, if you've got an ability to do it. And I know we were talking to Keith before we started here, and they said the beaches never close. And that's one of the things, if you're in the right area, you finish your hard workout, you do a light warm down, you go and you jump in the ocean, you swim around, and you swim around and move and help the blood flow. The buoyancy of water helps take the pressure off the veins, and blood flows through better. So cross training can really be used at any time. It's just, what I was talking about was, okay, it's hard to do, 3 weeks of cross training in the middle of your main preparation, unless you're injured and that's all you can do. So that's what I meant there. But any type of cross training exercise is great to do even during the season, as maybe as recovery thing, to keep off the pounding and things like that. So I think that's something you can do anytime. From what age can kids have lactate workouts? It depends. Paula asks us, it depends on the age of the kids. And again, once they've started puberty, which might happen at 11 years old, might happen at 13 years old or 14 years old, they start developing the enzymatic systems. And again, I'm not a physiologist, but I've done some reading on it. They start developing the ability to actually create the physiological response that helps develop that lactate system, which they're not really able to do earlier. And it's also a lot harder on them. So I think some ways formal, if you have kids doing exercise and running around, they're running hard and playing and running hard. I wouldn't say don't do that. Is that bad for them? No. But to get there and tell them, okay, we're running, 400-meter repeats for a 9-year-old, for one, that's too, that's hard to do at that age, and it's hard mentally to do, and they fatigue really quickly. A guy who I coached against for years ago used to say the hardest, he'd ask people at coaching seminars like this, what's the hardest event in track and field? And coaches would raise their hand and say the 1600. Another one would say, no, the 800. One would say the 400 hurdles. Another would say the 400. And then he'd say the 400 meters for a 6th grade boy or girl who's not very fast, but they're running as hard as they can. Because in about 45 seconds, you start feeling it. And they're running, if you run 400 meters in 43 seconds, like Van Niekerk did, you barely feel it. You take 2 quick breaths and then you give your interview and you're fine. I mean, yeah, you're a little fatigued, but it's not the same thing. If somebody runs as hard as they can, and it takes them 85 seconds to run a 400 meters, that means for 40 seconds, they've been physically dying. And they're not even able at that age to push that hard to do all of that. So I think, formal lactate work at really young ages really isn't good. And, you got to kind of look at them. And if you don't know them, you don't really know if they started it. But there are some signs with girls' physical development and boys, even some facial fuzz even, and muscular definition in boys. Girls, physical appearance starting to change. Those things, it's happening. So. Do the energy systems in the 80s? No, there's not gender, age, other individual. Well, yeah, the energy systems do change, not as much from male to female, but they change over time. For one thing, the older you get, your maximum heart rate you achieve gets lower. It becomes harder to do real intense lactate type work when you're older, because your heart doesn't pump as hard and things. And I can't remember there's a simple formula for, how you calculate your max heart rate by your age, but as your age gets higher, your max heart rate will probably get lower. Other than that, the energy systems work pretty much similarly, except that the lactate system isn't really developed until puberty starts. What's the lactate level where it's difficult? Suma is asking what's the lactate level where it gets difficult to maintain the speed. If you're talking about the scientific millimoles, how many, I don't know. And it depends on the individual too. But I'll tell you the lactate level where it gets difficult to maintain the speed is where you see them, they can't maintain it, or you feel I can't maintain this movement and the speed anymore. And it's the muscular contraction, and it's not so much from the lactate level, it's from the hydrogen ions adding to the acidity, nervous system issues. Your nervous system can't keep firing repetitively that fast without getting fatigued. So, I can't tell you what the actual measurement is. They could tell you by checking your blood then, and it would be different. Like I could run real intensely for 45 seconds, they could check mine, and Chester could run real intensely for 45 seconds, check his. And at the point where I started to learn that he did, his and mine might be completely different. They both be high, but how do you tell? Well, you can visibly see, or they can say, I felt it at this point right here. Okay, let me go back to the bottom here. Can you send us the slide? This will be posted right after I finish. I'll probably post this presentation, a PDF of it, up on that site I put in. let me enter it in again if I can. No, I entered the book name. Somebody could find that Facebook link there and the NACAC site and re-enter it in the chat if you want to. Timothy sent, Tim, is that the YouTube of Harding, I assume? Anyway, there's a YouTube thing in here. The entire chat log will also be saved and put on that in that drive as well. In reference to energy systems, is there a difference between males and females? Yeah, as we said, not really, but there is in terms of nervous system, there's, I wouldn't say this is hard science, but there's been a lot of success people have with guys because the main hormone is testosterone when they're 17, 18 and a little beyond. Women, it's the human growth hormone, which you produce both those naturally. I mean, the best way to improve your speed power through hormones safely and legally and not violating rules by doping with HGO or with testosterone is to do the right things in training, which elicit in certain types of strength training, elicit more testosterone development in boys, more human growth hormone development in girls, and at the right, at the age that they can do that. And guys, because of their systems are different by that point after puberty. So yes, there's some physiological differences, not so much in terms of the metabolic energy, but in terms of the hormonal things, and doing a lot of real intense energy takes longer for guys to recover from, and they can cut back on that and be fresher and perform better in high level competition, as opposed to women who might still be able to and might benefit from doing not a lot of volume, but a very small amount of real intense or pretty intense activity leading right up to competition, and they can actually perform well because they're stimulating a different hormonal system, a different hormone than men are. And I'm not an expert on that, so that's about the level I can explain that. But how to judge the athlete who's been overtrained? A lot of ways. One is in workouts, they're not performing as well. They look tired, they feel tired, they seem tired. Performance is going down in competition or in testing. They get more sick. You got to talk to, the best thing is to talk to them first. And there could be some other things going on. There could be a dietary thing such as, they're low on iron. And actually, women, when they start to menstruate, young women can be low on iron, especially distance runners might be. But I've had more problems with guys having problems with iron deficiency. And so maybe a simple supplement, eating a little more red meat, drinking a thing they have here that comes, a lot of it from Louisiana, right next to us, is molasses, is high in iron and other things, and it's a syrup you can mix with orange juice and drink. But the other thing is, here's a simple way to do a test on recovery, and it doesn't really matter what type of event area they're in. The hard thing is getting them to do it. If you take your resting heart rate every morning when you wake up, you just check your pulse here for 30 seconds or 60 seconds, look at your watch, look at the thing. Before you stand up is best, but after you stand up, just do it at a consistent time. In the morning when you've been rested and you've just woken up, let's say mine is 45. I don't know if it is anymore, I don't check mine, but let's say it's 45 every morning I wake up. But if I have a really hard day, if it's hot, if I go for a long bike ride, if I go for a run, which I can't do much anymore, the next day it may be 48 or 50 when I wake up in the morning. What is that telling me? My heart's pumping harder to put more blood through my system to help recover and repair it because I'm not recovered. It may be that I didn't get enough sleep. It may be that it was too hot. It may be that it was intense exercise. The day after, it may be back to 45 and I'm fine. With athletes, if they kind of know I'm usually this heart rate, the next day after a hard, intense exercise, they may be up. That's normal. 3 days later, if they should be recovered and they're supposed to do another thing, if it's still up 5 or 6 beats higher, that's a sign that maybe something's wrong. Maybe they're getting sick. Maybe they aren't sleeping enough, which is an epidemic problem with our young people. They don't sleep enough. Maybe they, are doing too much training and it takes them longer to recover because they're not adapting well. So that's another simple thing they can do. You can't do it for them. They can do, but just maybe talking to them and interviewing them a little on how are you feeling? Are you feeling tired? Are you feeling sluggish? It could also be what's going on in school, what's going on with girlfriend, what's going on at home. It could be that they're dehydrated too, and chronically dehydrated. Another thing you can do every morning and even every night is you yourself and your athletes, if you weigh yourself every night before you go to sleep, let's say you weigh 165 pounds at night, you wake up in the morning, you weigh 157. What happened? Well, you spent all night breathing, respirating, moisture coming out of there, sweating a little, even though you're not bathed in sweat unless it's really hot. Like me, you may get up and go to the bathroom in the middle of the night because you're drinking a lot of water in a hot climate, but you weigh a lot less in the morning. What do? You have to rehydrate yourself gradually through the day and keep doing it to build that back up. You eat, you put more things, and as long as during the day you get back to the 165, you're good. But if you get back to 162 because you don't drink or eat enough, then the next day you wake up, you're 156, you don't do it, you won't keep losing weight forever, but you're not going to have any energy. And so that's part of hydration that's important, especially in hotter climates and in summer. Growth plate injuries, a lot of times the kids aren't completely fused, and at the hips, at the knees, with the where the main patellar tendon comes in just below the kneecap, the heel, they call them growing pains here in our culture. When kids, especially boys, seem to have it more than girls, but a boy is in English system, he is 5'6", and 6 months later, he's 5'11". His bones have grown, he's growing rapidly, he's still exercising, but the bones grow faster than the tendons and the other soft tissue. So everything's tighter. The muscles and the soft tissues don't grow as fast. Everything's tighter and it's pulling more because his bones haven't formed. So here's the cap on the tibia, and the tendon attaches this, and the tendon pulls more, and there's cartilage in between that hasn't fused to bone, and it gets aggravated. And the same thing happens in the hip where your hip flexor is. And boys can actually evulse the hip flexor, meaning pull a little piece of bone off, if it gets too aggravated. So, too much intense stuff usually leads to some of those, not enough preparation ahead of time. Sometimes it's almost unavoidable. You just have to not do as much with some kids because they're growing so fast. And I've had kids literally grow 8 inches from 1 year to the next. So that's what happens with growth plates. How do you recognize them? Well, first thing is when they have pains in those areas, especially in the hips, you stop them from what they're doing. You have someone we have an athletic trainer we check with, it may be a doctor, you take it easy. And if it gets better and you stretch more and they can do things, all right, great. But if it gets worse, it can come to a point where they actually pull a piece of bone off, and that's not good because they've got to cease everything for a while. You don't want to get that far. So being on the safer side is easier. Can you see the signs in movement? This is from chest. Oh, this is from. Can you see the signs in their movements at training? They'll look tired and take long. Yeah, so I think that's a great point. Chester sent this. One of the basic things is to watch them, and the best time to watch them is warm up and warm down, not just the main activity, not just when they're jumping or when they're hurdling or when they're running fast. Watch them warming up, watch them warming down. If they have problems in movement and they look sluggish and they're not moving well, it may be a muscular issue, maybe their recovery, maybe a slight injury they haven't told you about, maybe that they're tired. And as Chester said, if they look tired and take longer to recover, if it looks like a duck, it walks like a duck, it's a duck. If they seem tired, they probably are tired, and talk to them about it, and then maybe end stuff that day or do something lighter instead of the hard stuff. So yeah, that's a little bit of that when I'm saying the sort of the art of knowing how to watch kids and talk to them and get them to communicate, and not always say, this is the training day, you have to do it. Maybe this person do it, this person can't. Don't have them do it that day, because it's not like, it's not like hitting the delete button or hitting on the old fashioned, you older people here, rewinding the recording and recording over it. You can't rewind an injury. So if they're getting to the point where they need rest and they need to, something's bothering them that may get injured, if you keep going and they get injured, you can't say, oh, well, we're going to just rewind and we won't be injured. You can't do that. So you've got to be on the safe side and communicate with them, get them to communicate. And that's hard with some athletes. Does that mean youth athletes? Here's a question for you. Youth athletes shouldn't specialize. Here, this has been a debate in our culture in the United States for a long time. Here's my view on it. The more involved athletes are at especially young levels, and even later on in high school level, the better they're going to be at that one thing that they're really good at. And we have a lot of kids in the United States and in our culture and in our school who do soccer year round. And sometimes that, conflicts with what we're doing. Sometimes they get overuse injuries there because we don't know what they had been doing all the time. So maybe they get overtrained. A lot of times they get hurt doing that. And then they can't play soccer. They can't do anything. We have kids who do volleyball. And over time, all they do year round is this. They have shoulder issues. Baseball pitchers who pitch all the time. By the time they're 16, they can't throw the ball anymore because they've injured themselves. The other thing I think is burnout of specialization. We talked about variety and activity. The more sports you can do is the better. You get more well-rounded activity. And if you end up being a great volleyball player, you're going to be a better volleyball player because you ran hurdles and you high jumped and you long jumped, and you're going to be and maybe you threw the javelin, and you're going to be a better baseball player because you did football and basketball, not just baseball year round. And I think especially when you're really young, but I tell you, I'll give you my example, and this is for older athletes. And we were actually talking, Sue, I was talking to somebody about Erin Aldrich yesterday, who was a really good high jumper, made 2 U.S. Olympic teams, and in between, because she loved volleyball and because she got paid to play volleyball in Italy, took off a couple years to play volleyball, and then came back to high jump again and made another team. And she didn't focus all of it, partly for socioeconomic reasons. She had to pay the bills, and we don't pay high jumpers very well in the United States, or coaches, and in your cultures too. I'm sure it's not a high-paying profession, but she was very good at both, and she was a good high jumper because she played volleyball, but because she trained for high jump and track, she was a better volleyball player. The other example is heptathletes and decathletes. A lot of times they may be on their own very good at one of those specific events, but if they continue to train as a decathlete or heptathlete, they actually may become a good heptathlete or decathlete. But then when they go back to that one event, maybe after 5-6 years, they go back to that one event like hurdles, they're a better hurdler. And Sue could tell me from Georgia, she was the U.S. Olympian before Sharon. She medaled silver medalist. What's that? Hiley's Fountain, who did all that, and then she was a great hurdler. She became a better hurdler after training for heptathlon. And then Sharon Day was a heptathlete for years, but she competed in the high jump in the Olympics, competed in heptathlon, Olympics, and World Championships. She had been a soccer player all the way through college still. So a good variety of backgrounds keeps you more well-rounded, makes you better able to handle things without injury, and it also keeps you fresh and excited, I think, for things. So does that mean you can't specialize and that no one can be successful specializing? No, I just think you're kind of missing out too, because especially young athletes, You may specialize in something, by the time you're older, you don't make it, or you're not as good, you don't get that level you wanted to. Maybe you could have done something else, or maybe you wouldn't have been great at anything, but you'd had a whole lot of fun being involved in some other sports and activities too. That's my own opinion there. Yeah, so injuries are obviously a good sign of overtraining. Often leads to injuries, chronic injuries too. Okay, what's the relationship of biomechanical development to energy system maturation? Like like coordination, I guess. I think they're, but this is just I don't think they're really related. I think some kids may be more mechanically coordinated and developed even before the energy systems are completely matured. Others may develop that, and that's partly nervous system that feeds the coordination. Some may just be later developing that kind of coordination. Another thing is tremendous spurts of growth oftentimes lead to lack of coordination for two reasons. Sometimes because just you don't have that coordination developed anyway. Also, you have to coordinate things a little differently now over time when things develop in that way. So I think it's more a nervous system than it is the energy system maturation with coordination there. Maturity is not indicative of specialization. Well, I think the question is, so maturity is not indicative of specialization, biological age versus physiological age. If you're talking about specializing in an event, or you're talking about specialized training, you can do you can do specialized training at a real young age, but that's if, you can have kids run in the grass over little small hurdles is specific, but it's also not real high level training necessarily. If you're talking about specializing in one sport and not doing the other ones, I think that would be when you biologically are developed and physiologically developed and mature in other ways is when you specialize. I'm not sure if that really answered your question completely, but okay, bye. Keith had to head off to another meeting. All right, I am going to, if there's any here's one new message of a question. Oh, okay, Chester, go ahead. I'm gonna, where are you, Chester? You can unmute.
Yeah, Richie. The issue with specialization, there are some sport that has all the specialization. For example, gymnastic, that is an all specialized event. But when it comes to athletics, when you speak about specializing, you are saying getting the athlete to do one event. So I'm a 100 specialist.
Right.
But during the growth of the athlete, they are different. He will be doing different sets of events. So he'll be doing all the throws, all the jumps, which is mainly like kids in athletics. At the age of 16, 17, you start to lead into specialization and work on what is specific for that child. Because of peak growth velocity happens after 12. So if you do certain work, like maximum strength work, you can damage their growth plate, which will affect them. So then the specialization is just saying that, okay, you do everything that is possible, you play among the amount of sports that is possible. But when you are 16, 17, I'm going to narrow in on an event and focus on that event to go forward, to become better in that event.
And that still depends on the athlete though, because you may have someone who's a tremendously well-rounded athlete who might sprint, like I've had examples of somebody who is on our 4x1 relay. They're in the 100 and 300 hurdles, and they also high jump.
Yeah,
so you're a speed power. They may not be. You're not necessarily doing the throws, distance, and sprints.
Right, but they what I'm saying is like saying that you're jack of all trade and master of none.
Right.
So, but you got to be careful with the age that you do certain activity too, which in the next week presentation, there'll be a slide put in as what they can do at certain age.
Perfect. Yeah, and that's what I said. He's going to cover that. I'm going to address this one last one here from Tasha. What could cause a sudden heel pain in a young athlete? Could it be a change in training? First, Tasha, I'm gonna ask you to unmute. Is it in the very tip of the heel? Like the very tip of the heel?
Like the very tip of the heel?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna mute you again so it's feedback. But okay, so and especially if it's an age, if somebody's growing, there's a fancy name for it, and I had it when I was a kid. When you're growing, it's one of those growing pains. It's where your Achilles tendon, let's say here's your Achilles tendon, here's your heel right here, and there's a cap at the bottom of it where the Achilles tendon attaches. And until you reach skeletal maturity at the end of puberty, there's a little piece of cartilage between the actual bone and that cap. And too intense activity or just any activity, because the bones are growing and the tendons are tight and they're not growing as fast, leads to stress on that. Plus, if they're hitting the ground wrong or they're pounding the ground too much, you can actually get little tiny fractures in that little cap of the bone. In the United States, they call it Seaver's disease, named after whatever doctor identified it. It's specifically apophysitis of the calcaneus, which is the heel bone of the foot. But you know, icing it, stretching calf and the gastroc and other things in the calf, it's something that I'll tell athletes, you know, sometimes it gets so bad they can't do anything. It also may not hurt after you get warmed up, but then when you quit and you go home and you sit for a while and you try to get up, it's excruciating pain because it's tightened up again. And sometimes you have to limit activity or limit the pounding. And it's something that doesn't necessarily go away unless you figure out how to stretch better and control it until you're completely matured. And I told kids with me, it was like, you know what, it's like a bad headache. You don't know when it went away, but all of a sudden you realize you don't have it. When they get to be 16, 17 years old, if they're male, and if this is a boy too, probably, is this a boy? Type in the chat if you know if this is a boy. All of a sudden it's gone, which means that the system is matured.
Example of racism in this community.
Pardon me? All right, does that answer that?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, and is it a boy?
Okay, is it a boy?
Yes, he's
Yeah,
10-year-old.
Yeah, that's pretty.
It's pretty typical boys.
Pretty typical boys.
All right. Yeah, and Dwight put on this footwear's unsuitable. Yeah, it may not be enough padding in the hook, or maybe improper foot strike. But all right. Well, next week Chester is going to present more on specific actual types of training and actual examples of training and types of ways to put it together. After we have a presentation on periodization as well, how to plan training. So that'll be next week. I thank you all for being in touch. I'm going to do this because somebody just said, can you keep in touch with me? I really can't because I can't do everything, but I'm putting my email there. So if somebody wants to email me, they can. It's also on your confirmation that you got for this. The same link will work for all of these sessions. So next week, the same link you click will work for all these sessions. And we'll try to put this information up as soon as I can today. It'll take a while for the recording process. But thanks to everybody for being on, and we'll hopefully see you next week. Bye-bye. I'm going to unmute everybody. You can say hi if you want to here.
Good job, Richie.
All right. Thank you all.
This is W.E. Good job, Rich. Thank you.